Chapter 6. The Dragon King. The ox cart bumped across a wooden bridge that crossed over a moat. Then it passed the guards standing by giant wooden gates. "Are the gates ever closed?" Jack asked. "Oh yes, every day at sunset," said the scholar. "When the gong sounds, the gates close, the bridge comes up, and the city is still shut for the night." "I guess visitors have to leave before that happens," Annie said. "Or they'll be stuck here for the whole night, right?" "Yes," said the scholar. The cart bumped between city gates. Rows of small houses were bunched together on either side of the street. They were made of mud with straw roofs. People cooked over outdoor fires. They washed their clothes in wooden tubs. As the ox cart bumped along, the houses got larger. These were made of painted wood and pottery tiles. They all had curved roofs. "Why are the roofs like that?" asked Jack. "To keep away the bad spirits," said the scholar. "How do they do that?" said Annie. "The spirits can only travel in straight lines," said the scholar. "Wow," whispered Annie. The cart went by some open tea shops. Then it passed a large market square filled with stalls and shoppers. People were buying and selling fish, chickens, firewood, wagon wheels, silk cloth, furs, and jade jewelry. Some people were lined up at a stall filled with tiny cages. "What's for sale there?" said Annie. "Crickets," the scholar said. "They make good pets. You can even feed them tea leaves and enjoy their delicate song." The cart moved on toward the Dragon King's walled palace. They stopped in front of the palace gates. "Grain delivery!" the scholar shouted up to the guard at the tower. The guard waved them through. Inside were beautiful gardens and huge mounds of earth surrounded by a low brick wall. "That is the imperial burial grounds," said the scholar, pointing at the mounds. "Who's buried in there?" asked Jack. "The ancestors of the Dragon King," said the scholar. "What are ancestors?" Annie asked. "They are the people in your family who lived before you," said the scholar. "Someday the Dragon King himself will be buried there. 300,000 workers have been building his burial tomb." "Oh man," said Jack. He looked over his shoulder at the burial grounds. He wondered why it took so many workers to build a tomb. "No," said the scholar. Jack whirled around. "What's wrong?" he asked. The scholar pointed at the palace courtyard. A dark cloud of smoke was rising into the sky. "Fire!" said the scholar. "The books!" said Jack. "Hurry!" said Annie. The scholar snapped the reins. The oxen trotted up the stone path. When the cart rolled into the courtyard, soldiers were everywhere. Some threw wood on a huge bonfire. Others were carrying bamboo strips down the steep stairs that led from the palace. "Are those books?" asked Jack. "Yes, the strips are tied together in different bundles," moaned the scholar. "Each bundle is a book." "Look," said Annie, pointing to the palace entrance. Stepping outside was a man in a rich flowing robe and a tall hat. Jack knew him at once. The Dragon King. Chapter 7. The Burning of the Books. The Dragon King watched the bonfire as it blazed up toward the sky. Around the fire, the air was thick and wavy. Bamboo books were stacked beside the fire, waiting to be burned. "Hurry," said the scholar. They jumped down from the cart and joined the crowd by the bonfire. The Dragon King shouted to the soldiers. They began throwing the books into the fire. The bamboo crackled as it burned. "Stop!" cried Annie. Jack grabbed her. "Quiet," he said. Annie pulled away. "Stop!" she shouted again, but her voice was lost in the noise of the roaring fire. "There's your story," said the scholar. He pointed to a bamboo book that had fallen off a waiting stack. "I'll get it," said Annie. She dashed over to the book. "Annie!" cried Jack, but she had already snatched up the bundle of bamboo strips and was charging back to them. "Got it, quick, put it in your sack," she said. Jack put the bundle of bamboo chips in his sack. Then he looked around fearfully. He gasped. The Dragon King was glaring at them. Then he headed their way. "Seize them!" the Dragon King shouted. "Run through the burial grounds," the scholar said to Jack and Annie. "The soldiers will be afraid to follow. They fear the spirits of the ancestors." "Thanks," said Jack. "Thanks for everything." "Good luck," cried Annie. Then she and Jack took off. Soldiers shouted at them. An arrow whizzed by. But Jack and Annie kept running. They ran down the path to the burial grounds. They jumped over the low brick wall and ran between the huge mounds of earth. Suddenly, arrows filled the air around them. The archers were shooting from the tower. "Look!" cried Jack. There was a doorway in one of the mounds. Jack and Annie ducked inside. They were in a long hall, lit with oil lamps. "It's so quiet," said Annie. She walked down the passageway. "Hey, there are some steps here." "Don't go any farther," said Jack. "Why not?" said Annie. "We don't know what's down there," said Jack. "This is a burial tomb, remember? It's creepy." "Let's just take a quick look," said Annie. "Maybe it's the way out of here." Jack took a deep breath. "You might be right," he said. "Okay, but go slow." He didn't want to stumble upon a dead body. Annie started down the steep steps. Jack followed. The lamps lit their way as they kept going down and down. Finally, they reached the bottom. Jack blinked. Even though oil lamps glowed everywhere, it was hard to see at first. When Jack's eyes got used to this changed light, his heart nearly stopped. "Oh, man," he breathed. They were in a room filled with soldiers, thousands of them. Chapter 8. The Tomb. Jack and Annie stood frozen. The silent soldiers stood too. Finally, Annie spoke. "They're fake," she said. "Fake?" whispered Jack. "They're not real," she said. "They look real," said Jack. Annie walked straight toward the front row of soldiers. Jack held his breath. Annie pulled the soldier's nose. "Fake," she said. "Oh, brother," said Jack. He walked over to the soldier and touched his painted face. It was as hard as stone. "It's amazing," Jack said. Annie nodded. "It's like a museum." She walked down the row between two lines of soldiers. "Wait, this is spooky," said Jack. "What is this place?" He put down his sack and pulled out the china book. He found a picture of the frozen army and read aloud. "The Dragon King has 7,000 life-size clay figures made for his burial tomb. The clay was baked and painted. The Dragon King hoped that the clay army would protect him after he died." "It's like the pyramid in ancient Egypt," said Jack. "Remember, the queen was buried with a boat and lots of things to take to the afterlife." He looked around. "Annie?" "I'm here," she called. She was far down another row. "Come back here," yelled Jack. "No, you come here," said Annie. "It's so cool. All their faces are different." Jack threw the book into his sack. Then he hurried down the road to Annie. "Look," she said. "Just look." In the flickering lamplight, they wandered down the rows of soldiers. No two soldiers had the same nose, the same eyes, or the same mouth. "Oh, man, no wonder so many people had to work on this tomb," said Jack. "They really did a good job," said Annie. "Yeah," said Jack. There were kneeling archers and foot soldiers dressed in red and black armor. There were real bronze swords, daggers, axes, spears, bows, and arrows. There were even life-size wooden chariots with horses. The horses looked completely real. They were different colors with white teeth and red tongues. "I have to take some notes about all this," said Jack. He pulled out his notebook and pencil. Then, kneeling on the brick floor, he wrote, "No two faces the same, not even the horses." "Jack," said Annie. "You know what?" "What?" "I think we're lost," she said. "Lost?" Jack stood up. "We're not lost." "Yeah? Then which way is out?" said Annie. Jack looked round. All he could see were rows of soldiers. In front of them, to the right, to the left, behind them, nothing but clay soldiers. "Which way did we come?" said Annie. "I don't know," said Jack. All the rows looked the same. They stretched out endlessly. Jack tried not to panic. "I'd better look this up," he said. "Forget it," said Annie. "Morgan said the research book would guide us, but in our darkest hour, only the ancient legend would save us." "Is this our darkest hour?" asked Jack. Annie nodded. "Yeah, it's pretty dark." "It does seem to be getting darker in here," thought Jack. The air was getting thicker, too. It seemed harder to breathe. "Let's ask for help," said Jack. He reached into the sack and pulled out the bamboo book. He held it up and said, "Save us." As Jack waited, the tomb seemed unbearably quiet. Jack held the book up again. "Please help us find our way out," he said. He and Annie kept waiting, but nothing happened. The air was growing even thicker. The light was getting dimmer. The countless rows of soldiers seemed creepier. Help did not come. Jack felt faint. I guess we'll just have to look," Annie said. "What?" "The ball of thread. It rolled out of her sack," she said. "So what?" said Jack. He looked at his cloth sack lying on the floor. The ball of yellow silk thread had rolled out, and it was still rolling, leaving a trail of yellow thread. Chapter 9. The Silk Path. "What's going on?" said Jack. "I don't know," said Annie, "but we better follow it." She hurried after the ball of silk thread. Jack put the bamboo book into his sack and took off after her. They followed the trail of thread down the row, where it turned down another row. "Hey, that's impossible," said Jack. "That's scientifically impossible." "I told you it's magic," cried Annie. Jack couldn't believe it, but he kept following the thread. Suddenly, the trail of thread was gone. The ball had completely unrolled. Jack and Annie stood still for a moment and caught their breath. What now?" said Jack. "I guess we go up those stairs," Annie said. "What stairs?" said Jack. "There." Jack looked through the dim light and saw the entrance to a stairway only a few feet away. "Let's get out of here," he said. They ran up the stairs. At the top, they saw that they were in the hall that led to the entrance of the mound. They walked and walked and walked down the lamp-lit passage. Finally, Jack stopped. "I don't remember this hall being so long," he said. "Me neither," said Annie. "I guess those weren't the same stairs that we went down." "What should we do now?" said Jack. "We better keep going," said Annie. "Yeah, we don't have much choice," said Jack. They started walking again. They rounded a corner and came to a door. "Oh, great," said Annie. "Wait, we don't know what's on the other side," said Jack. "Go slow, be careful." "Okay," said Annie. Slowly and carefully, she opened the door. Then she peeked out. "Yippee!" she said softly. Annie stepped into the fading daylight. Jack stepped out after her. The sun had gone down. They were standing outside the gate of the Dragon King's palace. They could see the market not far away. The stalls were closing for the day. "We're safe," said Annie. Jack breathed a huge sigh of relief. Just then, a gong sounded. It was coming from the tower of the city walls. "Oh man, they're going to close the gates," said Jack. He clutched his sack as they took off. They charged up the street. They ran past the market. They ran past the rich houses, past the poor houses. Their straw shoes fell off, but Jack and Annie kept running barefoot. Just as the giant wooden gates started to close, they tore through them. They charged past the bridge and kept running up the dirt road, past the farmhouse, and through the field. By the time they reached their tree, Jack's lungs ached. His heart pounded. His feet burned. He followed Annie up the rope ladder. When they got inside the tree house, Jack clasped. "Let's go home," he said out of breath. He reached for the Pennsylvania book. "Wait," said Annie, looking out the window. They found each other. "Who found who?" said Jack, panting. He dragged himself to the window and looked out. Two figures embraced at the edge of the field. "The silk weaver and the man who takes care of the cows," said Annie. "Oh, yeah," said Jack. "Bye," Annie called to them. The couple waved back. Annie sighed happily. "We can leave now," she said. Jack opened the Pennsylvania book and pointed at the picture of the Frog Creek woods. "I wish we could go there," he said. The wind started to blow. Jack looked out one last time at the Chinese couple. They seemed to be glowing like stars. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still. Absolutely still. Chapter 10. The Ancient Legend. Jack opened his eyes. He was wearing his own clothes and his sneakers. The cloth sack had turned back into his backpack. "Welcome home, Master Librarians," said Morgan. She stood in the treehouse, smiling at them. "Hi," said Annie. "We brought you the ancient legend," said Jack. "Wonderful," said Morgan. Jack reached into his pack. He took out the china book. Then he pulled the bamboo book. He handed them to Morgan. "What's the legend about?" said Annie. "It's called The Silk Weaver and the Cowherd," said Morgan. "It's a very famous Chinese tale." "Guess what, Morgan?" said Annie. "We actually met them. We helped them get together." "Oh, did you?" said Morgan. "Yes," said Jack. "The silk weaver's ball of silk saved us." "What does the legend say about them?" asked Annie. "It says that long ago there were heavenly beings who lived in the sky," said Morgan. "When they came to earth, they fell in love." "That's when we met them," said Annie. "Yes, I imagine so," said Morgan. "The book you brought back tells about their happiness on earth. But I'm afraid a later legend tells us that when they returned to the sky, the king and queen of the sky separated them by a heavenly river called the Milky Way." "Oh, no," said Annie. "They get back together once a year," said Morgan. "On that night, birds make a bridge in the sky over the Milky Way." Jack and Annie gazed up at the bright summer sky. "Go home now," said Morgan. "Come back in 2 weeks from today. Next, you're going to find a book in the country of Ireland, over 1,000 years ago." "That sounds like fun," said Annie. Morgan frowned. "I'm afraid it was a very dangerous time," she said, "for Viking raiders often attacked the sea coasts." "Vikings?" said Jack. "He'd had enough danger to last a long time." "Don't worry about it now," said Morgan. "Just go home and rest." Jack nodded. "I'll try," he said, pulling on his backpack. "Bye," said Annie. "See you in 2 weeks." "Thank you for your help," said Morgan. "Any time," said Annie. They headed down the rope ladder. From the ground, they waved to Morgan. Then they started for home. As they got to the edge of the woods, Annie stopped. "Listen to the crickets," she said. Jack listened. The cricket chirp sounded louder than usual. "Their ancestors lived in the time of the Dragon King," said Annie. "Oh, brother," said Jack. "Right now the grown-ups are telling the little crickets a legend," said Annie. "Yeah, sure," said Jack. "A legend passed down from their ancestors," said Annie. Jack smiled. He didn't want to admit it, but the cricket noise did sound like storytelling. He could almost hear them saying, "Dragon King, Dragon King, Dragon King." "Jack! Annie!" came a voice. It was their mother calling them. The spell was broken. The cricket stories were just plain old cricket sounds again. "Coming!" Jack shouted. Jack and Annie ran down their street and across their yard. "Did you have a good time in China?" their mom asked. "It was pretty scary," said Annie. "We got lost in a tomb," said Jack. but we were saved by an ancient book." Their mom smiled and shook her head. "My, books are wonderful, aren't they?" she said. "Yep," said Jack and Annie, and they followed her inside.